Ime?
Stephen J. Fowler.
Fowler. Okay.
Ladies' pockets. You have the best pockets on the front of your trousers that I've ever seen in my entire life.
Thank you, it's custom made.
I thought as much. So, I'm Stephen S. Fowler from London. And, well, first and foremost, I have to thank Diane and Moanis for the pamphlet, chapbook we call it in England, Shimpans, which was a title that Moanis suggested. He said it was appropriate for my work. It's a Slovenian translation of my name, Stephen, so thank you so much, Moanis. But in actual fact, I'm not going to read from the chapbook at all, because I saw the lineup via email. Diane sent it. And I realised I was last. And when you're last, and people have been sitting in a room for a while, and you think, everyone else is going to be reading in the first language of the audience, there's bound to be some extraordinary performances, how do you follow 2 hours of poetry? Maybe best not with more poetry, especially if you have suspicions about poetry being good. And so what I thought was, knowing this venue was kind of cool and edgy, that probably meant the audience was actually a group of bourgeois office workers. So I would do something that you would be familiar with, and so you'd feel comfortable and like me. So I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation for you this evening. We've begun auspiciously, Max. Empowering people.
You'll never walk alone.
It's coming. It's coming. This is a perfect interlude. Normally I wouldn't do this because it's inappropriate, but because the evening's gone a little bit later than I thought it would, because I thought we were starting at 8 in England, you would start at 8, and we started a bit later. I didn't have any dinner, so I'm actually quite hungry. I wonder if anyone's got maybe a chocolate bar, or... No, don't go and get the vegetarian tray, I've seen where that was cooked. Maybe a piece of fruit.
I've got a banana.
Oh, thank you. Has anyone got a chocolate bar, maybe?
I have.
Can I have your chocolate bar?
So while we wait for a basic PowerPoint presentation to be put up on the screen, that's an alpaca. This is Clement's computer, I assume. Take your time, Max, and just enjoy this delicious mandarin mixed with the Galaxy caramel. Thank you so much. This is taking care of my hunger immediately. An appropriate time for something to be loading slowly. That's the home screen with lots of different files. So the first slide will be up, and we can begin the performance. There's the mandolin first. Could it be? Could we be starting? Now, so far as I understand it, you gave me a time slot of about 45 minutes to an hour, right? So I've taken up about 2 hours. So I've taken up about 5 minutes. So I've about 40 minutes left. So maybe I'll have to speed up a little bit, because the original PowerPoint slide was 45 minutes. And obviously I've got 40 minutes left, so we might have to rush a little bit. It'd be fantastic if you didn't show all the slides. Brilliant. That's me. Please, next slide, Max.
My favorite.
So, when you travel as a poet from England and you need support, there's only one place to go. I know people here in Slovenia won't understand, but you have to have a good relationship with a monarch. Next slide, please. The PowerPoint has two goals. One, to improve the relationship between British poets and Slovenian poets. People who aren't poets, who cares? And two, what is poetry? Next slide, please, Max. It's actually not my first time here in Slovenia. My patronising Airbnb host went through all details of things that I already knew. I've been coming here for many, many years. When I first came here, I was 19. And so, there's this strange kind of mini crisis that happened to me a little bit. Because when I came to Slovenia the first time, and I've been here 9 times, I wasn't a poet. And walking around the city, and thinking back to how my life was before I was a poet, I started to realise, what the fuck am I doing with my life at the moment? Next slide, please, Max. Next slide, please, Max. I always like to put that in because, you know, you can't escape your own culture. A great man once said, we're all fated to follow the paths of our fathers. And I feel, as an English person, it's only polite that I apologise for you all being tired. Me too. Next slide, please, Max. I always like to put this slide in too, to pretend that I'm apologetic that I don't speak the language of the local country. I'm so sorry I don't speak Slovenian. Next slide, please, Max. Dejan's been very nice so far. I've heard mixed reviews of his cooking, but otherwise he's been very pleasant. And Moanis I know from before, he's looking well, and Gregor seemed to like me, so he's got my vote. Next slide, please, Max. There's nothing I like more than a lesbo show, though I don't like to pay for it. Next slide, please, Max. Unfortunately, the first obstacle that we might have in terms of building relationships between British and Slovenian people is the average British person's awareness of Slovenia existing. Next slide, please, Max. Now, I've been writing poetry for 5 years, and I've had one constant in those 5 years, and it's I've been through so many breakups. How many breakups? So many breakups. I wrote a book about it. Next slide, please, Max. What I like to do at this point in the evening is do a bit of an anthropological experiment with the audience. Everyone out there, here tonight in Metelkova, put your hand up if you've had a dream fantasy of murdering your father. Next slide, please, Max. You can't escape the country that you're from. Nobody talks about it because people think England is Downton Abbey. But we owned 1/3 of the world. We didn't do that through poetry. Next slide, please, Max. This includes you. I have never been to a country performing where at some point one of my forefathers, perhaps my great-grandfather, did not lay his rifle on the ground and go to a lesbo show. Next slide, please, Max. The second level of awareness, perhaps coming from the bourgeois people of England, might be just one contemporary Slovenian figure. How unfortunate. Next slide, please, Max. Next slide, please, Max. The crisis I was referring to before, walking around Ljubljana, remembering before I was a poet when I had a real job, and asking myself the question, why did I become a poet? Well, there's 2 reasons. One, I'm inherently and biologically hyperlinguistic. I think much slower than I talk. This, unfortunately, is a personality problem. Most people have a problem with confidence. They can't express themselves. They don't have the eloquence to do so. But when you can do it so quickly, that you can speak so quick that no one even really follows what you're doing, you can manipulate people to do anything. And it's a burden, because the desire to manipulate people really drives you through the day. If you can get something from someone and not create a conflict, why would you not do that? Why? Because it will make you feel hollow and empty. So naturally, I lent myself towards a linguistic medium, but then you get to poetry and you realise most of it is really shit. Next slide, please, Max. The other reason why I realised I got into poetry is because, unlike most jobs, it doesn't have a 9-to-5 grinding death routine, and also maybe you're not scared from your life, from your colleagues if you're in a building site like I
That used to be where they would threaten you with physical violence. That never happens in poetry, so poetry's pretty good for that. Next slide, please, Max. Now, the problem comes then, we get into a medium like poetry where people are basing, and I realised this just a few years ago because I've only been writing for 5 years, and what's dominated that time? Breakups. But apart from that, during that 5 years, one of the things that I did realise is there's no quality control. Next slide, please, Max. Now, this is not just in England, this is in Slovenia, this is everywhere around the world. If I have to listen to another 20-minute reading in a language I don't understand, I might start to think past to the times when I had to listen to poetry in English, and I can't even fucking stand that. Next slide, please, Max. Yes, I did do that. Next slide, please, Max. Now, I like bears. That made me happy. That was the highlight of my night, to see the little medved, whatever you call it here in Slovenia, some Slavic denotation of the bear there, and this means something else here, apparently. Next slide, please, Max. Now, a bit of local cultural investment. Next slide, please, Max. Maybe if poetry is limited, there might be some other options for us. Next slide, please, Max. No, not yet, Max. Not yet, Max. Not yet, Max. Press pause, Max. Thank you so much. Let's focus back to the reason why I'm actually here, the reason why the Queen gave me the money, to try and represent English culture to a group of savages who need to be civilized. The difference between England and Slovenia is we pretend. First, people like Hugh Grant, Next slide, please, Max. Of course, our wonderful poetry traditions and all the important rhymes and sonnets that we've produced from these posh people who had 7 readers, and now they say that there's less readers. Next slide, please, Max. I'm sorry. The amount of poetry tables I've sat at, especially with French poets who say, every time I meet an English poet, all he says is sorry for things he didn't do, and I say, oh, I'm sorry about that. Next slide, please, Max. Cuisine is so important. How often when you first get picked up at an airport do you get met and the first question someone asks is, what's the local food like? Next slide, please, Max. Now you can play the song, Max, and now we've got it right. Let's see if we can find out how different mediums interact with the notion of liveness. The notion of liveness as it comes from Tanya. Tanya. Turn it up, please, Max. Let's see. Is music more interesting than poetry live? Yes, it is. It's a live medium. Poetry's for the book. People read it privately in their homes. Why would you stand up and read a poem out loud? No one's listening anyway. They're thinking about their shopping list. Unless you do something where they have to pay attention and things are live, then you end up just having them check out and catch the occasional words. Catch up with the slides, please, Max. Next slide, please, Max. We have to think through actually what this medium is. Just like nations. What's happened to the slides, Max? This happened at the start. Oh, you tied it in. I wanted the music to keep playing. That's fine. Don't worry, Max. I won't blame you. This is a huge problem. Yesterday when I checked into my Airbnb, I was assured there'd be no migrants in the city. That's a very English thing. Next slide, please, Max. I said to the man, no problem, why? Because I'm English. I should have contradicted him and said, that sounds racist. But I wanted to say to him, really, it's coming anyway. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter if there's migrants in the city. People are moving. Things are changing. You're going to be in trouble. You can't keep hold of your Airbnb forever, my friend. Someone's going to find out. Next slide, please, Max. Oh, the poor man, the fear that he had in his eyes. And I felt like saying to him, my friend, my grandfather owned 1/3 of the world. There's nothing you can do about it. Things change. You must adapt. Next slide, please, Max. And we all have this one wonderful moment to take stock of where we are and what we're doing. Allow me to give you a gift that no poetry reading could ever give you. Next slide, please, Max. This is the date. This is where we are. Please, as I've tried to do every day of my life, my sad little pathetic introverted poetry life, look in the mirror and realise that if there's something you really want to do that might be slightly more interesting than poetry, do it also. Next slide, please, Max. Thanks for your time. Have a lovely evening.